So this is the history of industrialization by Megan Bissonette, Samantha Bueller, and Tiffany Hayes. So we're going to jump right into the Industrial Revolution beginnings and all that sorts. So artisans and tinkers led the Industrial Revolution by producing machinery, which helped make people's lives so much easier and their daily living that much easier. So we're going to start with experimentation, which is a big part of the Industrial Revolution because a lot of experimentation actually led into stuff that helps us today. So Josiah Wedgwood developed the processes to manufacture dishware based on his experimentation with Chinese porcelain. He also typified a culture of experimentation nurtured in Britain. Then we have, on a wider spectrum, global trade, which allowed European powers to acquire resources needed to grow in populations, which was huge because the life expectancy of people during the Industrial Revolution rose as the population rose as well. The population doubled by 1800 because of global trade introducing nutritious foods and other useful goods. Slavery and industry. Slavery gathered revenue to support the industrial age. 11 million Africans were sold into slavery in the Americas and forced to help in the industry. Slaves produced agricultural products such as sugar and rice and helped in global trade. Slave skills were used to make products like copper and tin for factory use. So now we're going to talk about some of the technology that was made during the Industrial Revolution itself. So we have the flying shuttle, which was invented by John Kay in 1773, which dramatically increased the speed of making wider cloth and better quality cloth. Then we have the gasoline engine, which was for cars, which was invented in 1885 by Carl Benz. We have the water-driven spinning machine, which is by Rich Ark in 1765. And then as pictured to the left, we have the spinning jenny, which is one of the biggest technologies made and most memorable, by James Hargreaves in 1765. And another huge one was the steam engine, which was invented by James Watt, and it improved steam technologies to efficiently drive factory machines, which also allowed factories to be built away from rivers. One of the main things that the steam engine did was increase the spread of technology. So interchangeable parts not only helped during the Industrial Revolution, but it still helps today. It was invented by Eli Whitney, who developed these interchangeable parts for use in his firearms. He assembled muskets in the first years of the 19th century, and this all allowed workers that were relatively unskilled to produce large numbers of weapons quickly and at a lower cost. One of the big things about interchangeable parts is that it made it easier to repair, and the replacement of parts that were broken or lost or something easier for everyone. It lowered the cost of gun production for Eli Whitney, but in the end, it sped up production of machinery. The Industrial Revolution actually gathered so much speed. New inventors such as engineers were expanding, and during the late 19th century, electricity used and everything that I just mentioned above expanded through homes and businesses.
So next, we will talk about the sexual division of labor. First, let's start with how men and women were treated differently within the industry. So men and women, for the most part, worked similar jobs. However, even though they were the same jobs, the women, of course, received lower pay than the men did. The reason this happened was because employers believed that the women's jobs required less skill. But if you think about it, this doesn't make too much sense considering they're the exact same jobs. But this is what their opinions were. Now, if we start thinking about the white-collar sector of the sexual division of labor, women did start being given more jobs than before. They filled all the lower-level white-collar jobs, and many employers became more generous with hiring women for things involving math, reading, writing, and other things along those lines. They still were paid less because of the idea that women are worth less than men and should receive less pay. The husbands weren't bringing home enough money anymore from their jobs, such as shoemaker or handloom weaver, which basically forced their wives to get jobs. They needed the extra income, so they were able to support their family. However, the men weren't happy when the women began working their jobs. It usually signaled that employers planned on cutting men's wages or jobs altogether in order for the woman to get paid as well. Next, we'll talk about the sexual favors. These jobs were extremely difficult for women to get without them granting sexual favors to owners or supervisors. Back then, they really had no other choice but to do these things since it was rare to be given employment, and as mentioned before, they needed the money for their families. It was very common for one woman to be chosen as a favorite and made to be the supervisor's mistress. This did not give them a definite long-term job though, because once the supervisor got tired of the relationship, the woman was fired from the job, and she probably had to go through the same situations over and over again in search for another place to work. Domestic service was thought to be much safer for young women, but it turned out to be just as dangerous. Many of these workers were harassed by the husbands and sons of the middle-class families. These men threatened to fire the female workers if the sexual favors became known by anyone else. So basically, it was inevitable for them to lose their jobs in the case of, for example, a servant becoming pregnant, or, of course, if one of the workers were just talking about it to someone else. So a picture to the right is a woman by the name of Adelheid Popp. She was a factory worker in late 19th century Germany who fell victim to the sexual favors I just mentioned. Her situation, however, was not as extreme as some other women's situations from that time. But her supervisor demanded kisses from Adelheid in exchange for higher wages. Adelheid Popp had the freedom to quit, which she did end up doing. Unfortunately, most other women weren't this lucky and had to deal with the constant harassment just so they can bring home money.
So now we're going to move on to the industrialization after 1830. Industrialization began spreading rapidly within countries and around the world. By the end of the 18th century, there was a widespread range of industrial, technological, and commercial innovation. Many new inventors came out with products like the first automobile, electricity, and electric elevators. Agriculture and farming began booming as well. Chemical fertilizers were created to help boost the crop yield and prevent the spoiling of plants. Dairy farming also became popular and mechanized through machines that could separate cream. In 1843, Cyrus McCormick invented the mechanical reaper. The mechanical reaper made harvesting more efficient and increased the productivity of farming. Wire fences and barbed wire started becoming popular and began to replace wooden fences. The wire fences and barbed wire helped prevent animals from escaping and prevented people from stealing farm animals. The only downside was that when animals got caught in the fences, it was difficult to have them removed. Lastly, the quantity and diversity of urban foods grew as refrigerated rail cars were created. The refrigerated rail cars allowed for foods to be transported longer distances without it being spoiled. Up until 1850, merchants, producers, artisans, and samurai warriors were the foundation for Japan's industrialization. Internal as well as external trade increased. Farmers began producing silk, sake, paper, and other commodities that Japan, as well as many other countries, needed. The samurai during this time were underemployed, therefore they began experimenting and creating new things. Japan slowly moved to develop factory systems in order to increase the production of guns, railroads, steamships, and other textiles. Japan had to adjust quickly to the other competing countries. They began to focus on acquiring Western knowledge to protect itself by developing its own markets and military. By the 1870s, Japan had thousands of miles of railroads, thousands of factories, and many steamships. For the longest time, the British dominated many countries. But by the second half of the 1800s, the United States, Japan, Argentina, Chile, and many other countries began to industrialize as well. The first country to surpass the British technologically was Germany. Germany took the French territories of Alsace and Lorraine with their textile industries, mineral deposits, and metallurgy facilities. Germany also put a lot of money into education, as well as research and development in the electrical and chemical engineering. The United States was another country to challenge the British dominance. The United States began exploiting their natural resources such as coal, gold, and oil. The United States' growth depended on innovative individuals such as Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller. Andrew Carnegie led the expansion of the steel and iron industry. John D. Rockefeller led the expansion in the oil industry. By the end of the 19th century, the British could barely keep ahead of its newly found competition.
To sum everything up, the Industrial Revolution brought about many inventions and ideas that are still around today. So thank you for watching our video about industrialization and the sexual division of labor.